Welcome, everybody, to this evening's meeting. The topic for this evening is the TUC Congress, which happened last week. And we're very delighted to have Louise Regan back with us. Louise, as you know, is an NEU officer. She's also a national chair for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign. And she's going to be our lead-off speaker. And then I hope there'll be lively discussion from the floor afterwards. So I'm going to go straight to Louise to start off our meeting.
The NEU, but also doing quite a lot of work for PSC as well. So I chaired their fringe and obviously did quite a lot of work talking to people about the current situation in Palestine. We, as the NEU, had done quite a lot of work on Palestine leading up to TUC Congress. So we had submitted a motion on Palestine. We had also requested that the ambassador was invited as a speaker. I mean, on both of those points, I would say there was a bit of pushback. So our motion that we submitted called for a full arms embargo, so for the ending of arms completely to Israel, given the current situation and all the evidence that is lined up against what Israel is doing. There was an amendment to our motion that was put in by one of the unions which tried to dilute that. And we, as a union, remained very strong in our position. We felt it was important that the TUC took a position which called for a full arms ban to Israel. And we eventually won that argument. The amendment wasn't incorporated into our motion, and the motion did not say that. The motion called for a full arms embargo on Israel or an ending of all arms sales to Israel whilst they're flouting international law, which was a positive step. And we also pushed back on the attempt to not have the ambassador speak, and we did have the ambassador speak to the full Congress, which I think was an important step in terms of what the TUC's position is and in terms of recognising the position for Palestinians at the moment and the impact of the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people. So I moved the motion for the NEU. It eventually was supported by the majority. In fact, there was nobody that voted against the motion. It was a strong motion. It was well received by Palestinian people as well. I've had lots of messages from friends in Palestine about the motion and about the speech that I made. And obviously, we will continue to push the TUC to implement now what we have agreed as policy. There was also, just so people are aware, there was also an emergency motion which came in from UCU and RMT, which dealt with the wider escalation across the region and called for trade unions to make sure they were supporting the trade union days of actions that have been called, and also called for the TUC to call out the widening escalation across the region. So there were two eventually motions on Palestine that were taken. So I mean, the PSC fringe was huge, was very well attended, had very good speakers at it. Omar Barghouti, who is one of the co-founders of the Boycott National Committee, the BDS campaign, spoke at our fringe. He came in person, was very powerful. And obviously within our motion, we had referenced that and spoken about the need for trade unions to do more in terms of implementing the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign. And that was then discussed further at the PSC fringe. So again, there was a sort of very focused discussion around what we should be doing within the trade union movement. I mean, the pushback generally that comes is from trade unions who have members that work in the arms industry. I don't think that is a reasoned argument. I think we have members in all of our, well, not in all, but in lots of unions that work in a range of industries. I mean, we had a very similar discussion actually around climate change and workers that worked in industries which we are trying to push back against. It isn't that we don't want to support workers, but we should have a transition for workers away from those sort of industries. And actually, we've been having some discussions in our union about the arms trade and what, would that is that something we would be wanting to encourage young people to work in, when they could work in industries that help people rather than harm people. So I think there are lots of discussions to be had around this, but I think generally our position is the boycott, divestment and sanctions campaign is a really solid, good campaign, and we should work with workers in those workplaces to educate them about what we're doing and why we're doing that, and build their support for us. So obviously, I mean, I could talk. There is a national demonstration next Saturday at Labour Party conference. So if people aren't aware of that, in Liverpool, there will be the next Palestine national demonstration, again to put further pressure on the government, who have, as you may be aware or may not be aware, have said that they have issued some arms embargoes. It equates to about 10% of arms that go out. So 90% of arms licenses are still being issued. So we are going to Labour Party conference to again raise awareness and put pressure on the Labour Party to back a full arms embargo until Israel comply with international law. I'll talk about a few other things because you asked, you raised a few things, Carol, which I think were interesting things that I think we ought to think about. I mean, the Prime Minister spoke, so he addressed Congress. I don't know if people saw his intervention to Congress. So he did come and speak to conference about the Labour Party and their view. It was, for me, I think I was very uninspired by any sort of vision. So there was a lot of talk about it was a changed Labour Party. There was a lot of talk about what we ought to be doing, but there wasn't very much talk about what we are doing as a Labour Party or what they are doing as a Labour Party. It obviously he came and spoke just after they'd announced that they were scrapping the winter fuel allowances, which caused a lot of upset. And there was a pushback about that to the party about why they would scrap a winter fuel allowance, which is a small cost. It's a very small saving for them. But actually, if you look at it logically, the long-term impact of that is much more expensive, because if pensioners are anxious about their fuel bills, they won't put on their heating, they become ill, then they have to go to hospital, then, they have to have an ambulance to take them to hospital, they have to be in hospital for a period of time. There's a cost for all of those things. So it's like you're saving a small amount of money to spend a much larger amount of money. And there was a lot of discussion around that, and there were motions that addressed that. There was also a question about the two-child benefit. So when the Prime Minister spoke, there were then some unions asked questions. One of them asked a question about the two-child benefit cap, which obviously, again, I don't know how many people know this, but obviously this came up early on after the Labour Party win and they were elected to government. There was a vote around scrapping the two-child benefit cap. And the Labour MPs that voted against that have had the whip removed. So there's a group of MPs who voted against that, and they've had the whip removed. Now, you could say, well, it's saving money or whatever. But for me, as an educator, there's been increasing child poverty over the last 14 years. I find the two-child benefit cap a very punitive system. So the only way you can get additional money, so you could get money for a third child as a woman, is to say, I was raped and prove that you were raped. And then you can get additional money. Now, that seems to me a really horrific system that we should not support. But also, child benefit is there to support children and to keep them out of poverty. That's what we should be aiming to do. And it would seem to me that scrapping anything which is punitive around children is a good thing to do. But again, the party would not support that, and the MPs that voted for that have had the whip removed for a period of time. Again, those MPs that voted in the vote in Parliament around the child benefit cap, all of them voted against ending the winter fuel allowance. So there's a little block of Labour MPs that seem to be supporting those in our society that are in the most need, as opposed to the most rich in our society who continue to get richer, which is pointed out multiple times at Congress. So we will continue as a union, and I'm sure others will, to push against the two-child benefit. The other campaign that the NEU has been heavily involved in and pushing with the Labour Party is universal free school meals. And again, they haven't committed to that. Again, there's lots of evidence, lots of unions who work in children's health have pointed out that providing universal free school meals actually saves money in the long term because of the positive health impact that it has. But again, the Labour Party is not supporting that. And then the final thing I'll talk about, because I've taken a lot of your time, is workers' rights. So there was a lot of discussion around this at Congress. Obviously, the Labour Party have made some concessions, talking about getting rid of certain legislation. But again, I think all trade unions felt that we needed much more from the Labour Party in terms of supporting unions, in terms of supporting workers' rights. So there have been discussions around things like 0-hour contracts, ending those, rights for workers from the first day. And it feels like there's sort of a bit of a rollback from the Labour Party at the moment, trying to not do everything that they sort of committed to when they were standing for election. So again, I think this is something that as a movement, we are going to have to take up very seriously. So I think generally, I mean, I have to say, as a teacher, when I listened to the speech from the Labour leader, he said nothing about what they were going to provide for education, nothing throughout his whole speech. There was nothing about what he was going to do to solve the funding crisis in our schools, the crisis for children with special educational needs, the fact that we can't recruit enough teachers, the fact that support staff are treated, appallingly, pay low, term time only contracts, didn't deal with any of those issues. And for me, education has to be central to everything, really. And if we don't sort that out, we won't sort the ongoing problems in society. So I was very disappointed with his speech personally, in that he didn't address any of the issues for me as an education worker. But I'll stop there because I've spoken for a long time. Apologies.
I don't think you've spoken for long enough, actually, Louise. But very, very good. Lots of issues touched and raised, and I've already got 2 hands up who want to ask questions or contribute. So that's great. Yes, I one of the questions I'd like to ask. I mean, you said you weren't very impressed with his speech. He's saying that there's going to be a new deal for working people. Did you feel that was the truth when you listened to him?
Definitely not. I don't feel like that as a worker. So, and I'm sure lots of other people didn't. But as I say, it seemed to very focus on his speech on, we're a changed Labour Party and we're going to do something, but never really giving any detail about what they were going to do. And for me, if you're going to make a change, you give people how you're going to make that change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to bring Phil in now. Phil Vellender.
Louise, thank you so much. That was really fascinating, and I have to say rather sad, because it almost seems all too predictable. I think what I was going to mention was, I was reading the Financial Times in my coffee place in Broadstairs, Kent, which is a centre of socialism and progress, as you know. And we note, if we look at the FT today, there's two things you need to notice. One is that the FT is saying there are more holes than in an Emmental cheese in this New Deal, and plenty of space to drive a coach and horses through most of it, particularly around the status of workers, which is where it seems that the thing is particularly weak. In other words, how do you define yourself as a worker will play a big part in what protections you will get. Secondly, there was, and this is slightly diverging from your point, there was a letter from several leading economists condemning Rachel Reeves' position on the economy. And it does look very much as if there's a gathering storm now of people just saying, you know, what is the point of this government? And I think on so many levels now, I mean, you've mentioned education. I mean, there's no, with Tony Blair, it was education, education, education. So you could at least say rhetorically he was committed to doing something. I haven't heard any of that from Starmer, and it's really disheartening. Where in my area, particularly in Thanet in Kent, the educational outcomes are really poor. And we have a grammar school, another, gone into special measures, which is unbelievable, unsatisfactory. I mean, what's going on? So it's resources. Secondly, I would just to finish off then, just to say, I think it's really concerning that we're running two tracks here. One is austerity, and the other is this appalling approach to migration, which is really concerning. I mean, when a suited and booted Starmer goes and meets with a fascist like Maloney in Rome, with police escort who are all clothed by Hugo Boss, who provided the fascists with their uniforms in the 1920s and 30s. It's really rather depressing to think that the best that they can do is to just attack migration rather than attack the sources of it and what can be done about it. And I find this Cooper particularly is appalling, but there is nothing on there in their policy. It's all about smash the gangs, you know, and we've just had 9 or 10 people drown in the Channel. And this is the best they can do. So I hate to be depressing, but I think you were optimistic, Louise, really, with your assessment. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Phil. I've got Mike and then Steve. Mike.
Yeah, I don't think you're being pessimistic, Phil. I think your realism shines through because, I mean, you know, there is nothing to recommend at the moment, this Labour government, and its rhetoric is shrouded in the fact that every ordinary working people are going to have to pay yet again to save the system for those who are not being taxed at all and whose system is in crisis. So, yeah, I mean, that's the backdrop to it all. But first, thanks, Louise. It was very wide-ranging. And just on the Palestine section, which is crucial because at a time like this, with, you know, it's just horrifying and existential death and destruction being wreaked by, you know, the Western stooge, Israel, who are doubling down and doubling down. One cannot believe internationalism isn't some sort of tack on to any serious workers' movement. It is right at the heart of it. And I'm afraid to say, Louise, that pretty much all the brothers and sisters kind of, you know, it almost feels like they'd like to, you know, go back to sort of good old terms and conditions and industrial struggle. And, you know, yes, we'll talk the internationalist talk. I'm not saying you, but I'm saying the majority. Whereas actually, unless we embrace the fact that workers in other countries who are being obliterated, we have to support them. They are the people we support. Our own bosses and our own government are the enemy. Unless we do that, we're stuffed. Actually, we really are stuffed. And, you know, the leader of my union, Sharon Graham, Unite, I believe she was behind the so-called wrecking motion that didn't succeed. Thank God. She is actively blocking us in the union and others talking to workers who work in the defence industries. We need to talk to them. We need to develop a debate. We need to develop a discussion around this. They're not, how many of them are comfortable sort of, creating the things that end the lives of and maim countless more Palestinians? They want to find a way through this, which preserves jobs, but actually gives them something to do. I mean, there is a parallel between civil servants working for the border force who ended up doing a joint action with Care for Calais. It can be done, and I think it really has to be done. And just the final thing to say is that you said the way the government is going about it is not going to save money. Well, actually, it is going to save money. It's going to save money for the ruling class and for the people, again, coming back to my original point, who created all this. Because, this sort of iron wall has been put around them so that everybody else has to pay. It is an active anti-working class government that we have here. We can't even call them centre left. We have to call them a right-wing government. And, austerity part two. Unless it's been well said in the media that unless Starmer lightens up a bit, everybody's just going to get so sick of him they'll chuck him in the nearest river. But, Labour might be digging its own grave, but what are they, are they really so much in hock to the ruling class and to the US sort of military industrial complex and the Israelis that they cannot see that they are actually digging a grave for themselves?
Absolutely, Mike. I can't agree more. I'm going to bring Steve in, and then I've got one more hand up. Steve Mackenzie.
Yeah, Steve Mackenzie for My Sins Unite member. Thank you very much for your contribution, Louise. Agree with everything that's been said so far about the Labour Party, and the answer to the question that was just raised, are they really that much in hock to the establishment and to the military-industrial complex in the state? Well, as far as I was saying, yes. There's absolutely no question about it. And they are digging their own grave, but they're digging the grave of a lot of other people as well, because what they're effectively doing by behaving like this is they are being facilitators for the populist right. And I think the next election, we're going to see the likes of Farage and Reform and an extreme right-wing Conservative Party as well, coming back into vogue, because that's who people will turn to desperation when all hope in Labour has been dashed. A couple of things I wanted to ask Louise, and please forgive me for my cynicism. It's a disease. I've picked it up over the years and I can't help it. But, whilst critical of the Labour Party, I'm not too enamoured with the TUC, never have been over the years, especially since the miners' strike in '84. And I looked at the agenda this year, and I must say I was delighted with what's happened with the NEU and Unison resolution, a composite that went through on Palestine, despite the attempts of certain individuals to weaken that. But I've just got a couple of questions. One on that. Now that the resolution has gone through, can you tell me what the TUC is actually going to do to improve trade union participation in support for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, demonstrations and BDS and all the other campaigning that's going on. And just on the anti-union laws, I think a good resolution was passed on that, but I couldn't help smiling when I saw the last part of it. And they said within, if it's not passed, if all of these things like doing away with fire and rehire and, the minimum services bill being done away with and all the other things like 0 hours contract. If the Labour Party doesn't do that, in the first 100 days, we're going to organise a special TUC conference to debate that further. And I thought, well, Christ, that will send shockwaves through the corridors of power, won't it? I bet they'll be trembling in their boots. I've seen this all before. When Thatcher brought in the anti-union laws in '83, special conference was called, you touch one, you touch all of us. And there'll be a massive response from the TUC. The Stockport Messenger dispute, when the NGA was fined once, twice, and then 3 times, enormous amounts of money for those days. And surprise, surprise, the TUC did absolutely nothing. Please tell me it's going to be different this time.
Very good question, Steve. And yes, I understand your cynicism. I've got another hand up. Louise, do you want to come back now for those questions, or shall we hear Robin? Yeah, okay, Robin.
I noted either today or yesterday, I think it was in The Guardian, that Jeremy Corbyn and quite a few other MPs attended the collective conference maybe this last weekend, and there was talk about a new party left of Labour. I'm wondering whether Louise had any conversations at all that might have suggested that trade unions are considering the possibility of moving their allegiance away from the Labour Party to other political organisations that might represent them better. I'm from Suffolk Unite.
Thanks very much, Robin. Okay, so I don't see any further hands up. So I'm going to go back to you, Louise, to answer those questions and contributions.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll do what I can. I mean, I apologise if I seemed optimistic about the Labour Party, because that is clearly far from my views about what I think they are going to deliver. So I'm very pessimistic about where we're at. I mean, there were several things I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about health. I mean, actually, if you look at what they're saying currently about the health system, it looks like they're moving further and further down the route of privatisation, which is a terrible thing for our country. So, there's that. The migration issue is disgraceful. The things that they are currently saying around migration are completely against anything we should be supporting in the trade union movement, and has rightly been pointed out, we've had yet again further deaths in the Channel, and actually as a party what they should be doing is sorting out the system, making safe passage possible, and rather than blaming the migrants that are trying to get here because of the situation that they are in, they should be allowing those people to move here safely and allowing them to be here in a proper way, instead of being in the humiliated way that they are when they arrive now. So, I mean, we have, as a union, have very strong policy on safe passage and on the rights of refugees, and we will continue to push that with them. Just in terms of a couple of other things that have been raised, I mean, you know, what is the TUC going to do? They're not going to do anything unless the trade unions push them to do that. And as again, it will be certain trade unions within the TUC that will be pushing for those things and fighting for them. But you know, it will only be driven by us as membership of that organisation that will push them to do things. It's, you know, it won't happen without us driving that forward, in my opinion. You know, and there has to be some pushback from the unions within the TUC to make sure that we are doing the things that we have agreed to do. On the final question about the new left political party, I mean, I assume you're talking about the Peace and Justice Project conference that happened this weekend, whoever asked about it, because obviously that was called this weekend. And there I wasn't at the conference because I had an NEU event, so I wasn't there. So I don't know what was discussed. And there may have been a discussion about that. I mean, in my view is, I mean, the NEU is not an affiliated union. We have never been affiliated to a political party for a number of reasons. And one of them being that we don't want to affiliate to a party and therefore be beholden to that party, which is what sometimes it appears happens if you are affiliated. So as a non-affiliated union, we can say whatever we like, and we will put pressure on all of the parties equally in terms of our demands. So we have never affiliated. I think it would be very hard to move some of those parties, some of those unions away from the Labour Party. And the reason I think that would be difficult is because a number of them have members that have gone through their processes to become MPs. So they have people who are in Parliament who came through the trade union movement, because that is how it works, you know. And if you don't know the structures of the Labour Party necessarily in that way, then you wouldn't necessarily know that. So I think that they would find it very hard to pull back from the Labour Party when they've got members that are there that they have pushed to be there representing them. And again, you know, do those people truly represent workers? You know, I don't know. We don't have that in our union. And therefore, I feel that once you become elected to a party, you move away from your trade unionism and move into electoral party politics, rather than remembering where you came from and what the importance is of trade unions. So I think it's difficult.
Yes, I think if I can just yes, I'm a question that I'd like to ask you is, how can the trade union grassroots, how can the trade union members push for things that we want to happen, like, you know, a true New Deal for workers, like lifting the 2-child benefit cap? What can we as trade union members do? How can we bring pressure to bear on the trade union leaders to do the kind of things that they should be doing? They should be doing these things anyway, and it's clear that they're not. So that's a question from me. But anyway, I've got Mike, and I've got some more hands up now. Mike, and then Richard again. I'll bring Richard in first because Mike has spoken. So I'm going to bring Richard Sampson in first.
If this is off limits, what I'm going to say, then just you can feel free to silence me. So I wanted to say thank you to Louise for a very interesting presentation and the comments of the other people in the meeting. I'm a ex-Labour. I was expelled from Labour for being too extreme, or being what they call too anti-Semitic or whatever. Funny, because my dad was a Jewish exile from Nazi Germany, so I'm right in the crosshairs of the people that Sama and his gang want to go for. But so I'm very pro-Palestinian, of course, as well. And I wanted to ask you, as a chair of Palestine Solidarity Campaign, if that's allowed by the chair. I've been very concerned. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, obviously, but I do know that some people like David Miller of Bristol University have felt that they've been no platformed by the PSC, and other people as well who've been accused of anti-Semitism and maybe been outspokenly anti-Zionist, have been felt that they've been abandoned by the PSC, and that the PSC has taken a kind of political view, it seems, like by trying to build a big tent policy in the face of trying to bring people into this movement. They seem to abandon people who were on the radical left, anti-establishment edge of the movement. So I would say other people. I mean, David Miller's the most obvious case, but I don't know the ins and outs. But other people like Chris Williamson or Tony Greenstein and others who've been very vocal and haven't been anti-Semitic at all, but have been labelled anti-Semitic in the public forum, and have actually been cold-shouldered by the PSC. I'd just like to hear what you have to say about that, Louise. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Some good questions. I'm going to bring Mike in again, and then back to you, Louise.
In a way, I'd very much like to hear Louise's answer to Richard's question just now. But if you want me to go ahead now, I mean, yeah, I think Richard's question is very real. And insofar as the whole Zionist lobby has managed internationally to successfully conflate being pro-Palestinian and being anti-Zionist with being anti-Semitic. And until those elements can be prized apart and we can explore, when you explore the history of Zionism, which came primarily from, in the first instance, it was exceedingly unpopular amongst the Jewish diaspora, and it was non-Jewish anti-Semites like Balfour who said, we don't want them in our country, so let's help them get a country of their own. And typical colonial arrogance and brutality. Well, whoever's there, let's just get rid of them. And that was, in essence, the start of the Palestine problem. But no, what I wanted to explore a little bit, I wondered if we could, to sort of debate really the difference between trade union militancy, because, I was very condemnatory about my union leader, Sharon Graham. Sorry, the local racetrack outside. I don't know whether you heard that. Sharon Graham, who refuses to allow any support for Palestine within the union and says things like, we don't have members in Palestine, and, just totally crass things. On the other hand, likes to position herself as the militant who is challenging government in relation to austerity and in relation to the winter fuel allowance issue and so on and so forth. And I mean, this sort of trade union militancy, but social at home, but social chauvinism internationally and abroad, and basically loyalty to the essence of the British state, what we would call, in this group, the British Crown, actually means that at the end their militancy is a sort of, I would suggest, their militancy is a sham. It's a play act. They're marching the soldiers up to the top of the hill, but they're not going to challenge the state because they are loyal to it. They're not going to challenge the Crown because they are loyal to it. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be genuinely interested to hear other people's views about this. But I believe that we can't have a movement that effectively fights for workers' rights at home unless we can fight for the interests of workers and oppressed peoples everywhere. And, to go short of that is pretense.
Absolutely, Mike. I couldn't agree with you more. And I think Louise will be definitely agreeing with you because she has marvelous contacts with Palestine and has visited many times and has contacts with trade unions in Palestine. Anyway, I'm going to go back to Louise now to answer those questions and contributions.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just Palestine. We have links with trade unions globally in the trade union movement. I was at Justice for Colombia meeting at TUC. They are one of the highest risk countries in the globe in Colombia to be a trade unionist. You're the highest risk of being killed. They're continually killed, and we had a Colombian speaker at our NEU conference. Everywhere she goes in Colombia, she has to be in a car that is bulletproof, and she has to have armed guards because she's under such threat as a trade unionist. So, it's not, obviously we are in solidarity with Palestine, but we're in solidarity with workers globally because everywhere across the globe, workers face oppression. What is happening to us here in the UK as workers is not unique. It's something that is happening globally. Neoliberalism is a global epidemic which is attacking workers and putting pressure on workers and trying to cut our wages, and attack our conditions of service. So, we obviously would stand with all workers globally, and we should be doing that. And we should be doing that just not in words, we should be doing that in actions. And I think that is sometimes something across the trade union movement that we don't always do. We can verbally say we support those workers, but what are we actually doing, in a concrete way, which has an impact on those workers? So I think that is really important and is something which we need to discuss more in the trade union movement. Several people have asked or sort of intimated, my union doesn't necessarily do that. I mean, all trade unions work differently, and I know some unions have more sort of prescriptive policies or whatever. But all I know is within my union, when I first joined a few decades ago, we wouldn't have been able to do any of the things that we're doing now. The only reason we've been able to do it is because lay activists, people like me and others, have fought within our union through the democratic processes to make sure that our union has good policies on those things. And that is the only way forward, really. You will rarely get a leadership that will just say, we're going to do these progressive things within a union, if they're not a very strong left leadership. It is for those lay members to push back and to fight for the policies that they want. So my union's been campaigning around Palestine since the 1980s. Many unions haven't, but over the decades that we've been campaigning, we've improved our policy, we've pushed back harder, we've made sure that we've had the strongest policy possible. And finally, just go to the question. I mean, I'm not going to comment on individuals because it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that. I'm not here to talk about individuals. What I would say is that the Palestine Solidarity Campaign is under huge pressure at the moment in terms of attacks upon us and attempts to demonize us and shut us down. So we always look at every case individually. We do what we can to support individuals and to work with individuals. And I don't believe that we try to silence people. I don't believe that we try to ostracize people. It may feel like that at times, but it may be that there are things that we know that other people don't necessarily know, or don't have all the information that necessarily we have. Our aim is to be the broadest organisation possible. We are the largest organisation in Europe campaigning for Palestinian rights. We have been at the forefront of building the biggest demonstrations there have been, I think, across Europe, really, in terms of supporting Palestinians. And we are always open to discuss and talk to people about things that they are doing and things that they have said and support them with that. I have also been, I was suspended from the Labour Party on anti-Semitism charges. I took the Labour Party to court along with a couple of other people, and my suspension was overturned. But I actually resigned from the Labour Party in October because I was so appalled that they weren't calling for a ceasefire. So I'm no longer a member of the party. And I think it's unlikely that I would return to the party given their current position on many things. But I think as PSC, we try to do the best we can, and we work very closely with Palestinian partners. So for me, our core, what we should be looking at and listening to is what Palestinians are asking us to do and to deliver. And that is always our driving factor, really, in terms of our decisions.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Louise. I don't see any further hands up. So thank you very much indeed, Louise, coming and giving your time again. I know how busy you are. I mean, national chair of PSC, and you still find time to teach in a primary school, which always amazes me. So we're really, really grateful for you coming along again and talking to our group, because you were there at the TUC Congress, and you obviously took a very, very vibrant part in that Congress. So thank you so much for your views and reporting back to us on what's going on there. And so I just like to say thank you to everybody else that's arrived, that's attended the meeting and is still here. Everybody, I think you've been you really kept people interested, Louise. Everyone's still here, which is marvelous. So thank you to everyone who's attended, and thank you for your questions and your contributions, but mostly thank you to Louise for once again giving us an amazing meeting and giving up her time for us. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.